Okay, so good morning all. Great to see you here today and welcome to our webinar. This webinar is looking at disease management for early established cereals and pulses. And today we'll be providing some updates, tips and tactics for the 2026 season. This webinar is proudly presented by the GRDC Disease Management Extension Network, and we're thrilled to have you joining us today. So we've got a jam-packed agenda for the next hour, and what we'll be covering is the main disease risks in early sown cereals and pulse crops. We'll take a look at the seasonal outlook and implications for disease development and management in a wet versus dry finish to the season. We'll talk about integrated disease management tactics for the rest of the season, and we'll also talk about some of the fungicide resistance considerations. So we have some great speakers joining us today who are part of the Disease Management Network, and I'd like to take a moment to welcome them here today. So first of all, we have Dr. Tara Garrard from SARDI. Tara, give us a wave. How are you? Dr. Tara Garrard is a cereal pathologist and the sub-program leader of cereal pathology with SARDI. Her research focuses on cereal diseases, fungicide resistance, and integrated disease management. We also have Dr. Hari Dadu from SARDI joining us today. Hi there, Hari. Dr. Dadu is a pulse pathologist with SARDI, specialising in pulse diseases, disease epidemiology, and integrated disease management. His work helps growers manage disease risk through practical research-based strategies. And we also have Dr. Josh Fanning from Agriculture Victoria joining us. Dr. Fanning is Research Leader of Plant Pathology at Agriculture Victoria, and he leads research into pulse and soil-borne diseases and works closely with industry to develop practical disease management solutions for growers. So we've got a great lineup of speakers today. So we'd also welcome you all for joining us today. We'd also like to acknowledge the Kaurna people on the lands where we're meeting today for this webinar, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and acknowledge the presence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people who are joining us here today. Okay, on to a bit of Zoom housekeeping, please. So we've got a large number of people joining us from the southern region today, and we just want to say a big welcome to you all. Because we've got so many joining, please keep yourselves on mute so we minimise any background noise. And also you can keep your cameras off for today. And please note that we are recording this webinar, and so then it can be available for some people who can't join us today. There might be questions, so we got a heap of questions in the registration process, which is great, and I'll throw some of them to our panel session later in the webinar. But for those of you who'd like to ask some questions as we progress, we ask you to please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll reply to these directly via the Q&A box, or else we'll bring them to the panel session after our speakers have provided an update. So just note, not the chat box, head over to the Q&A box, which we've highlighted there, and we'll see how we go with time, but later we may have an opportunity to raise your hand with any questions in the panel session. If you're having any issues with audio, please leave the webinar and rejoin. Often that can help reset the system, but hopefully your sound is good. We did a sound check before, and we hope you're hearing us loud and clear. Okay, so before we get started, we do just need to give a big shout out to the DMEN team, and love a good acronym, but it's a GRDC project which brings together disease management, research and extension network across all of the major grain crop diseases and soil-borne pathogens. The goal of this project is to increase adoption of fungicide resistance and disease management strategies to reduce the emergence and impact of fungicide resistance and key diseases. And you can see there's the team all smiling in our latest team photo, and you can see all of the project partners from this national project. So a shout out to all of the project partners that we have as part of our extension network team, and thank you again to GRDC for supporting this project. It really is a great project because we have the opportunity to host webinars at point in season when we know there might be increasing disease pressure, like we're seeing this season with some of the early established crops. So without further ado, I reckon we get started for the day, and I'd like to hand over to Hari and Tara to kick off, and then they'll pass straight to Josh. We'll then open up for our panel session. So Hari and Tara, over to you. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Bill. Good morning, everyone. This is Hari. I'll just talk on pulse things first, and then give it to Tara for the cereal stuff. Regarding pulses in South Australia, just want to start with weather update. So what we have on the graph is two contrasting maps from 2025 and 26. 25, as you can see, for the first 6 months, it was very dry. There was about average of 50 to 100 mils across the state. But there is more good news for 2026, as you would have been experiencing for the last 6 months. There is rain after rain event. And in fact, in Adelaide today, we were just drenched with storms and rain, heavy rain. So that is really good news after 3 or 4 seasons of dry seasons. And also it means that there is really good soil moisture, really good establishment at the moment, what we are seeing across the state. This is really good news for the farmers. And on an average, so far for the 6 months, what we have seen is nearly 300 mils of rain at different parts of the growing regions. We do expect this is really good build up for the season. Talking about really good rains, it also is bad for diseases as well, because that gives a lot of conditions which are really favorable for a lot of diseases we deal with in both pulses and cereals. In terms of current risks, especially in pulses, there is ascovita blight, which we already have noticed in the field trips that we have taken in the last week or so. The crops are just on 4th to 5th week, but what we have seen is significant amount of disease already being established. And then we do expect botrytis, if the conditions do continue like this, and then a bit more warmth than what we have at the moment, can create perfect conditions for botrytis grey mold in lentils. And the other disease that we have seen in the last few seasons in increased prevalence is Sclerotinia white mold. There are a lot of reports in the last few seasons, and we do have a lot of samples that we did collect last few seasons. We have shown significant amount of activity. And if the conditions once again continue like this, we do have a lot of inoculum, which might be biting us back in the later half of the season. For faba beans, perfect conditions for Sarcospora leaf spot. In the 1 or 2 crops that we have surveyed in the last 2 weeks, we haven't really found much of it, but the conditions are really perfect for it. So please keep monitoring your crops low in the canopy, which is where the Sarcospora might be hiding. And also ascovita blight, which might be starting as well. We haven't seen ascovita blight in the last few seasons because of the seasons being very dry, but the conditions that we have in the last 2 months especially are very perfect for ascovita blight to start and show up again. And later up in the season, once again, like lentil begium, we do expect botrytis in faba, which is called as chocolate spot, popping up, and might cause concerns if the conditions really turn out to be wet in the spring. I have to forgive myself for just highly being biased on lentil and faba bean today, but for those growers who are growing vetch, lupins, and chickpeas across the country, please be reminded that there is similar risk exists for those crops as well in terms of ascovita and botrytis and also Sclerotinia complex. On top of this, very familiar risk, what we have also seen this year is a lot of upbeat about virus challenges. There are samples which we have been receiving on different viruses. There is a lot of virus which is going on canola at the moment, but in lentils and lupins we have received for CMV as well. We haven't really detected anything yet, but we do see the symptoms actually look alike for those viruses. So please keep sending samples so that we can actually test them and let you know if that is a disease risk. In terms of the disease management, there is more challenges than what we think this year, because what we have seen in the last, after the harvest last season, we did have a good spring finish, especially October and November last year, which meant there was a bit of inoculum that was actually driving through the seed. And we did have nearly 20 odd seed samples that we received, which we tested across SA and Victoria. What we found is there's a significant number of samples showing Ascodata infection in all of them. And the infection percentage ranged from 5% to 85% in some of the paddocks. So that shows there is high level of inoculum, especially for Asco, carried over through seed. And those people who have got infected seed, they might be facing more risk than what it is usual. And on top of that, we do have seen significant amount of green pits established across SA because of the rains that we had in the spring and also following in the summer. And on the photo that I clicked in March, which was not a crop of lentil, but it was self-sown lentil crop, and it was really beautiful. But the only downside of it was there was significant amount of Asco growing on it. So that is another risk that we might be seeing. And also, if people are planning to already have sown into pulse stubble, maybe even different pulses, consider there is risk from botrytis and sclerotonia because those pathogens have broad range of host and also can be problematic given the conditions what we have. For those people who have sown susceptible variety, it is very important to have a very good plan of fungicides because of the conditions that we have at the moment. Also, we do have a lot of issues in terms of diagnosis of symptoms. We do receive a lot of samples which are mimicking disease symptoms, but not exactly. So it is very important to understand whether you're seeing a disease symptom or it is actually a herbicide damage or something else. So seek advice where you can, either to the local agronomist or probably at state pathologist, so that we can actually help you in correct diagnosis and also tailor a management strategy for that. And also because it is very wet, I do remember 2022 was very similar, where we had a lot of rain, and one of those seasons where we couldn't really take the spray rigs into the paddock and also have those timely sprays. So it might be similar case if the rains do continue. So make sure you have proper plans in terms of how you want to get the fungicides into the paddock. Also, pathogen itself is it's very important to understand the life cycle of the pathogen. Some of the pathogens have longer survival abilities in the paddock. For instance, this one is an example of PGM, where we had trials in 2025 in mid-north. It was because of the season, it was so dry, we had clean trials without any disease. But what we did was we did collect some stubble for other purposes and put it on the lentil crop in the growth rooms. And what we are seeing is suddenly there's a lot of PGM developing in the growth room. So one thing what we can infer from this example is some of these pathogens actually can survive a longer term, which means the previous season, even though it is not highly disease infectious season, it may be still carried through this season. And it all needs a susceptible host and perfect conditions like what we have today to pop up and cause a problem. So always important to have that strategies in terms of what you're dealing with, in terms of your variety, what variety it is, and what its resistance towards different set of diseases, so that you get perfect control activated. And having said that, also sclerotonia can actually stay for nearly 10 years in stubble or through sclerodes. So it is very important to know different diseases and their life cycles. Once you know the pathogen you're dealing with, it is also important to understand these pathogens can actually selectively adapt to the varieties that we grow. And we do call as in pathological terms as pathotypes, where each pathotype can be infectious to a particular variety. In lentil, we do have a program where we do collect samples across the country and put out on a different differential set, what we call, which includes lines with different resistant genes. And what we have seen in 2025 season, we did collect a lot of samples across the country, and then we have seen more disease on hurricane, which is what we call as hurricane virulence, and it is still dominant. But the other striking factor that what we have seen is we did put thunder in the mix, because thunder was grown across the country last season, And also we have got a lot of inquiries about thunder. And what we are seeing from this experiment is more or elevated virulence on thunder, particularly. Although thunder carries a bit of hurricane genome in genetics in itself, but what we have seen is elevated amount of disease than hurricane. So that infers that a lot of people are growing thunder across the country and putting more stress on the pathogen population, which actually is selectively adapting towards the thunder variety and causing more disease. So for those people though, who are growing thunder this year, make sure that you have more disease to deal with, because the pathogen currently what we have has more virulence on thunder. Disease management decisions for the rest of the season. It is very important once again to monitor the crops. The crops are at vegetative stage at the moment. Have a look at what the early diseases are doing, and if there is disease, and also the conditions that we have. It is very important to tailor your strategies and have a plan based on your varietal resistance. And we do have moderately resistant to resistant varieties in pulses for different pulse crops. Make sure that you have a look on those ones as well to see what type of diseases are existing and what management strategies you need to do. And when you do decide about fungicide choices, it is very important to understand whether you have a proper fungicide chosen for that disease, and also the timing when you have to spray to control the disease. And also at the end of the season, it is very important to understand to minimize the seed infections, harvest at maturity rather than harvesting at very early in the season, or delaying it for too far, because either of the case can actually cause more disease infections through the seed. I just want to give an understanding about what are the critical periods in pulses. There are 3 critical periods that we call in pulses. One is early vegetative stage, which we are at the moment, and that is the stage where we target for Ascochyta and also Cercospora leaf spot in beans and various Ascochyta complexes in other crops as well. And the second period that we call is canopy closure, which will be around August to September. And it's always important to have a pre-canopy closure spray for controlling BGM. If the conditions do continue like this, there is definitely a big risk coming up of BGM. And we do know, like, if BGM takes over, then there is very limited chance of having any yield. And the other stage that we do recommend to have a lid on is end of flowering, flowering and podding stages, where we have, if you do have good spring finish, then there is more chances of the disease taking into the pods and also into the seed infections. So it is very important to have a plan of attack in those timings for control of the disease. With that, I'll hand over to Tara for chat on cereals.
Thanks, Hari. So as we know, it's been a pretty wet start, and we've got a lot of early sown crops as a result of that. And this means a couple of things. It means that the crops have gotten up and going early, and so we've got denser canopies than we usually have at this time of year. But also the conditions where those plants are getting established have been a bit warmer. And that's the perfect recipe for many of our fungal foliar pathogens. So we are seeing reports right across the state of a whole variety of different diseases. In the wheat, we've had predominantly leaf rust reports and one stripe rust report at a very low level. Septoria triticide blotch, there's plenty of that around. Lesions are developing in the lower canopy. Yellow leaf spot, we do see this every year. Thankfully, that's one we've got quite good genetic resistance to, and so we often see that taper off as the adult plant resistance kicks in. In barley, the net blotches are really ruling the roost here, and both net form and spot form are taking off to a firing start. There's plenty of inoculum around on the stubble loads, and a little bit of barley leaf rust as well. Then more generally, we've had quite a few crops that have been touched up with either a bit of herbicide damage that's causing some chlorotic splotches and some questions around, is this early disease? But we've also had saprophytes. So these are fungi that live in the soil and on the stubble and are degrading that down. And they predominantly feed on dead tissue, but we do see early on some symptoms on lower canopies when plants are young. And this is often because a few of them are weakly pathogenic. And you can see this picture down in the bottom right-hand side of those white spots with the really dark halo around the outside. That in the paddock looks just like disease. It really does look like disease, and it's because it's a fungal, it's caused by a fungus, but this is going to taper out, and the pathogen that's causing it isn't going to be able to continue to infect the crop as it gets more advanced. So it's just going to touch up those lower leaves, and then the plants are going to grow out of it. And it's because there's stubble and we've had plenty of rain on that stubble. So I've had a lot of questions about that, and if you are seeing it, it isn't anything that you need to worry about. Okay, so in terms of the rusts, this is incredibly early in the season for us to be getting rust reports. And I have to say, you know, that is a big concern because we know the earlier in the season that we get detections, often the worse the potential for that season is. However, in saying that, you know, I talked about it being a little bit warmer as the crops were getting established than what we're normally used to. We're now actually cooling down, and we're going into the dregs of winter where everything really slows down, and our fungal pathogens do this too. So if you have a look here, I've got our different rusts that we commonly see. Stem rust, no reports of, but that's really a late season thing. It likes the spring conditions, and you can see that in the temperature range from 15 to 30 degrees is its optimum temperature. Stripe rust is the one that has the most ability to proliferate through winter because it does like those cooler season conditions with an optimal range from kind of 8 to 15 degrees. So look, we will put out crop watches if we do continue to get more reports of stripe rust, and if we think that is any broader spread, because that's one we do need to keep an eye on. The leaf rust, while we are seeing quite a bit around, you know, that really does thrive in slightly warmer conditions of 15 to 22 degrees. And that goes for both wheat and barley leaf rust. So I think it's good to know that we've got it here. Be prepared. And, you know, we need to then monitor that pretty closely and be prepared once those conditions start warming up as we come out of winter. The barley net blotches, I said that on barleys, this is really what we're getting the most reports of. And, you know, these are complex. We've got quite a few different things going on with them. But what puts us at risk of yield loss from barley net blotches is not having very good variety resistance. So growing susceptible varieties, and you can see the MVT ratings there. For 2026, these are the SA ratings. So if you're in Victoria, just double check online, they might be slightly different. Early infections. Now, we've not only had early infections, but we've had early sowing. This allows more time in the growing season for those the pathogen to undergo its life cycle and create new lesions. High inoculum loads. We do still have quite a lot of inoculum from last season and previous seasons. This is coming from the stubble, and we know we've got stubble retention systems are pretty common. Some of the things that are a bit more in question as we go into the rest of the season is probably we're setting up for some dense canopies with the early moisture that we've had, and having high humidity and big canopies later in the season can be a disease risk because we don't need the continual rain so much as that humidity in order for the disease to proliferate. However, if it really dries up, like some of the predictions say, then that might actually be a natural stop, and that humidity may not remain. And so really a lot of this comes down to our spring conditions and what we're going to see. But it's really important to know that when we've got these high inoculum levels early in the season, that is a big risk, and we should be planning and getting prepared. So protective sprays, if that's what you're planning, have an idea of what you're going to do and think about protecting the leaves later in the season. So we want the flag -1 and flag -2 protected. However, we do have a few fungicide resistances in our net blotches, which further complicate things. Here's a bit of an overview of the status in South Australia for fungicide resistance. However, we're constantly kind of getting new bits of information, and we don't have a high level of detail about the changes and differences within regions and region to region. So across the state in our barley net form net blotch, we now have field resistance in both the group 3 and group 7, the DMI and SDHIs, and then reduced sensitivity in group 11. So in saying that, whether or not you've got those in your local area is going to change, and that the detections of the group 11 particularly are quite limited at the moment. The other thing to remember is that with the DMIs, we have multiple chemistries that sit within that mode of action, and there's different resistances and efficacies between them. So some of the ones that have maybe had less exposure, I know there's a new one on the market in a couple of products that hasn't had much exposure. So we would be guessing that that's going to be responding better than some of the ones that have maybe been used for a long time. In spot form net blotch, we've got reduced sensitivity in the DMIs, and in the group 11s, we've had a lab detection. We've also got a bit of an update there on the wheats, so you can have a quick look at that. The map we've got here is from the Fungicide Resistance Portal, a tool that's been developed with the CCDM, Fungicide Resistance Group, and this is basically all the samples that have been received and what they were rated as. And so you can adjust that based on the mode of action as well as the disease and have a look for yourself. The link is there at the bottom. So that's probably the best way to keep up to date, but really what we recommend is rotating your modes of action and not using a single mode of action on its own. If you can, keep it in a mix and protect them as much as we can. All of our principles from AFRIN. So Septoria triticide blotch, this one is quite a risk for this season. It likes early sowing, lots of time for those disease cycles, susceptible varieties, which we have a lot of in our commonly grown wheats, high inoculum loads and high rainfall. So this is a rain splash disease. We will need moisture later in the season in order for it to get up onto those top leaves and to actually start causing yield loss. So if the tap does turn off, hopefully that means the Septoria halts at the point where the tap turns off. However, we've got to remember with Septoria, we've got a long latency period, and the colder it is, the longer this is. So you may have that those symptoms and those lesions developing from an infection point a couple of weeks ago, but it could be maybe 3 weeks before that actually appears in these really cold conditions. So keep that in mind about when your last infection event could have been. And I've got a graph here of some work that was a collaborative project that Hari led in Victoria, looking at it. The yield losses we get in Septoria really are worse in wetter seasons and in our susceptible varieties. So you can see a comparison of 2021 and 2022. 2022, where it's wetter, you can see our yield losses are much higher, up above 35%. And they're worse in our varieties that are S or SVS. So, you know, there's a lot of cards on the table here that put us at risk for Septoria this year. So it's a good one to be prepared for and start planning your fungicide applications to protect those leaves later in the season. And if you're struggling with decision making on that, there is a new app that's just been released for Septoria triticide blotch, and there's multiple other apps like this that you can also use and download to help assist in your decision making. I think Josh has got a slide on that at the end because there's quite a few available. So that's very exciting. And look, if you're struggling with diagnostics, seek advice, reach out to us. The details are there. We're more than happy to receive samples and help you suss out how you're proceeding forward. Thanks. I'm going to hand over now to Josh Fanning.
Tara, can I just, I've got one quick question in the chat, just a point of clarification. Back to your slide where you had the map. The question is the DMI tebuconazole? I would like to know what is tested to give us this map.
Yeah, so it is predominantly tebuconazole. Yeah. And so that's where you need to remember that we've got a lot of different chemistries available in those DMIs, and that there's varying levels of fungicide resistance between them. So yes, it looks quite bad there, but in practice, we do get more efficacy than what that map conveys.
Beautiful. Thanks, Tara. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Tara. And thanks, Harry. I'm going to try not to repeat too much that they've said. So I'm just going to go over a little bit on Victoria and the risks over here, and then go a bit more broader as well. So I've compared this year to 2022, just in terms of that rainfall, just to give people a little bit more idea of what's happening at the moment, I suppose. And that's the sort of season that I'm comparing it to at the moment. So you can see here that on the right of my screen and your screen as well, that's 2026. On the left is 2022. So the northern part of the Mallee is in that above 200 mil rainfall for the start of this year, whereas before that, in 2022, there was a little bit less. So but overall, they're looking pretty similar seasons as the start. So this is the very fast break, which analyzes all the models. So the forecast for this season is talking about warmer and drier, and that's what we keep hearing. But we've been hearing that right from the start. What does that actually look like, though, in practice? So we've seen that we've had a really wet season to start off with. What does that look like moving forward, though, in terms of actual rainfall? So this is two maps that I downloaded off the bomb last night. They were issued the 25th of June, so really recently. And I've put the whole southern region there. This is the amount of rainfall that's forecast as a 75% chance. So great website on the bomb. You can change it to 50% chance or 25% chance. I've just grabbed the 75% chance, which is their highest chance prediction. So you can see there in July, we're still looking at getting above 50 mil rainfall across the Wimmera and large parts of SA. And in the Mallee, we're still looking at 10 mil of rainfall. When you go to the August to October forecast after that, there's another 100 mil of rainfall still forecast. So yes, it may be drier, but we're still going to experience, according to their forecasts, potentially a large amount of rainfall over that period. And what do we actually require for the season to get through? So what do things look like now? Tara and Harry have both touched on that. In Victoria, we've seen that really early plant establishment. This crop here of vetch from one of the advisors that sent it in to me, sown in February. There was large amounts of crops that went in early, but it wasn't also the crops that went in early. It was also those crops were out of the ground really quickly. We had good rainfall very early on, and we had really warm temperatures, which allowed early plant establishment. The seed didn't sit there for 6 weeks. In some instances, crops were out of the ground in 2 to 5 days. So we've got really advanced crops. We've got a full soil moisture profile in numerous areas. And then how much rain do we actually really need to get through the season? Are we looking at average rainfall area in your area now to get us through the season? Or if we have below average rainfall, will we still reach our average yield potential? What's that look like? And how will the rainfall fall? These are all predictions that we don't know about. So if we get them in large events, then that's obviously going to change the status or the disease risk compared to getting that rainfall across lots of little scattered showers. That's obviously going to help our diseases like botrytis come through, and some of our stubble-borne diseases keep coming up. And then the other scenario, what happens if a tap does just turn off? What's that risk and what's it look like? That's stuff that we've got to take into account now. So I've put it there as tough decisions. We don't know what the forecast looks like, so we need to prepare ourselves for both scenarios. I hazard a guess if we get average rainfall, or we still get 100, 150 mils of rainfall through the rest of the season, we're still going to be looking at significant disease risk. We've got 100% soil moisture at the moment in a lot of areas. We can see the puddles in paddocks. We can see the waterlogged paddocks. That's going to radiate humidity back up into the canopy for months to come, unless it really just dries out and gets hot. But that hot weather is going to aid in that evaporation from the soil, which is going to keep our canopy humidity quite high. So some pointers that I've come up with: apply the more effective fungicides on our more susceptible crops. They're the ones that are at risk the most. And it buys you more time if you can't get on. We keep getting these weekly or fortnightly rainfall events. We're still struggling to sow some of our trials. So some of our later sown trials, we're struggling to get on the paddock. So how are we going to get on to spray? By applying those more effective fungicides on the susceptible crops. Disease moves very quickly in susceptible crops. So putting the more effective fungicides on them buys you more time. And in those MRMS or better crops, MS, you've got a little bit more time than the highly susceptible crops. So if you can get on in those extra days, then basically you've got yourself time through genetic resistance or the fungicides that you've applied. Apply your fungicides to the most susceptible crops first. Again, it's around that timing. I would be checking your most susceptible crops first with scouting as well. Obviously, disease most likely is going to turn up in those crops that are more susceptible, or those paddocks that are at higher risk. So if you've planted lentils on lentils, wheat on wheat, they're the crops that you're going to have to check first. Or those paddocks that you had disease or see disease in all the time. They're the ones that I'll be checking. And again, you just have that less time with susceptible crops. That's why we keep pushing more resistant crops. The other question is, do you need fungicide on resistant crops? Yes, we've had a wet season, but a lot of our economics say don't bother applying fungicide on resistant crops. Yes, in pulses, we need to protect our seed, but if you've got an R-rated crop, there's no need to put your fungicide on it. We're already starting to hear of fungicide shortages, and I've been asked, I can't get my fungicide that I want to apply. Is it a shortage of fungicides in general, or is it a shortage of the product that you want is not available and you want the best product, or you want this product? There's lots of products offered now and lots of options registered, so we can rotate those products around, and your choice product may not be available, but have a backup plan for plan 2, plan B, plan C, if you can't get the products you want. Know how often you have to apply them if they're products that are single actives, but try and go for the dual actives where you can. And what's going to be most economical? So if it does turn wetter and we do have those issues where we are seeing 2022, we don't have enough fungicides, we can't get on our paddocks or all that, where are we going to prioritize? One of the companies I talked about before, it's thinking about that I've gone and talked to in amongst a few different companies I've talked to. It's talking about thinking about your genetic variation, so your varietal resistance, but it's also looking at what diseases are going to cause you the most yield loss. We know stripe rust and stripe rust in wheat. We know botrytis in lentils can cause large amounts of yield loss. There's other diseases that only cause 10, 20, 30% yield loss. Ascochyta in faba beans, probably only 5 to 10% yield loss. So are we controlling that as our highest priority, or are we targeting botrytis? And I know when we're talking Ascochyta and faba beans, we're often controlling that for our botrytis risk as well. But look at net form and net blotches. It's not going to cause 100% yield loss. So target those crops that it's most profitable. And it's not just about maximizing a yield. What is it worth to you? So do you have contracts that you have to deliver that's going to penalize you more? Do you need seed for next year? Do you have alternate profitability? Can you get profit from grazing or hay or other options? So I'm just trying to pose different options for people to think about. So it's not just all about protecting our crop through fungicides. There's other options that we've got, and what happens if it does get tough. So fungicide options in pulses. This article's a little bit old. I've got to get to updating it in the next week, which I will do. But it's an option there. It lists most of the fungicides that are available. There are a couple that have been registered in the last couple of years, keeping in mind that those ones that have been registered in the last couple of years often are the same chemical groups or same frac groups, essentially. So keep in mind those sorts of decisions when you are rotating, that just because it's says it's a new fungicide, look at the active ingredients rather than the trade names. Always check the latest permits database. So I noticed, say, prosimidone has run out of permit according to my article there. The permit's actually been extended on faba beans when I went to the APVMA and looked at that permit number. So it's really important to double check your permit numbers if you're working on permits, or know when you're going off label, which we shouldn't need to really go off label with any of this. The other thing that I just wanted to touch on is don't forget to think of the whole plant. A lot of our work often focuses on what we can see. It's really important to look at soil-borne diseases and think about the risks there. So crown rot, we've got really high density crops at the moment, great biomass. So if a tap turns off, how does the moisture go up to support those big bulky canopies in wheat? If we have a harsh finish, crown rot's going to become a problem. If we continue on with a wet spring, we're more likely to see more take-all. So our whiteheads in crop that we might be looking at may not be crown rot, they might be take-all. So that's something to think about. Pulses, we're seeing fusarium come through. There'll be some more presentations on that throughout the year at workshops. We can't do much about these in the season, but what we can do is we can check for them, we can look at them, and they can inform rotations for future years. They can inform what seed treatments we need to do, and our management practices for future seasons. But we can't dig up plants in January to have a look and see what that risk was and what we saw in the paddock the year before. So that's why I'm suggesting look now and don't forget our soil-borne diseases when we're thinking about it. So I just thought I'd plug in, put a little plug here for the field day for those that are from Victoria here. We've got a field day with Markroft Grains Pathology on Thursday the 16th. So you can come in, have a look at some of our trials, talk more about this in person rather than on a webinar. I'm sure there's opportunities in South Australia as well that Harry and Tara will be talking at. There'll be pathologists across Australia doing presentations. This is just one for Victoria. So register for that if you're interested, and come and talk to Angela and Markroft Grains team as well as our team during that day. So diagnosing disease, there's lots of options and available to you. Tara touched on sending samples to SARDI. I just thought it'd be good to touch on what's best for diagnosing a disease and how do you access that support. And this is something we talked about in Adelaide last week at our surveillance meetings nationally, and promoting a bit more about how we can support you better by you supporting us when you're asking questions. So take at least 3 photos, a paddock scale photo. So we're not just seeing a couple of plants dead in a paddock. We can see what's the scale of the problem, what's the pattern, what's the spread of the disease, what's the spread of the problem if it's not disease in your paddock. Then some whole plant pictures, so roots, stems, leaves. Yes, the symptoms are important, so we're asking for symptom pictures as well, but it's also important to look at the whole plant. What you might be seeing and what you might think is the issue may not be the issue that we think of is there. And then if you're sending plant samples in, remember to dig the plants up and send in the whole plant sample so we can do that. That's for an accurate diagnosis and it'll help speed it up rather than us come back to you. Can you get pictures? And we know that you've left the paddock potentially days ago before we get the sample. So for us in Victoria, submit to CropSafe, but you've seen the details for Tara and Harry, and there's details for every state if you're not joining us from Victoria or South Australia. So our research supports you. So all the information you see here, you saw Harry present details on differential set testing or different isolate testing. So there's samples you've sent in to us and basically get tested back onto a standard set to go, how do we know how the pathogens are changing? So we've got a lot of research programs across Australia that underpin that. In Victoria at the moment, we're chasing wheat powdery mildew samples, botrytis, rhizoctonia and sclerotinia. And then obviously any abnormal disease samples you can't identify. That's both for biosecurity, but it's also to help you understand what's happening in your paddock. It helps our area of freedom data as well, knowing full well that we trust our industry to send us things that they don't know that they can see. Reach out to us. There's a couple of emails there. Our mobile numbers are pretty well widely circulated as well. And samples can be sent to Nannymuck Road for Victoria or SARDI in South Australia for the South Australians. Continuing on the tools, Tara touched on the new Septoria app that Harry's had a lot of influence and Tara's had a lot of influence on putting that together across that trial program. There's a whole suite of applications that have been put together by the DPERD team that all the pathologists Australia-wide have done. So there's lots of tools there to support you with your decision making, particularly stripe rust. There's powdery mildew in there, sclerotinia, yellow spot, and blackleg, which you'll hear more about in the seminar on Friday. So just to finish off, just to summarise what we're talking about across us, everything comes back to risk in your paddock and risk, and it comes back to integrated disease management. So what variety did you start with? Yes, we can't change our variety now, but if you've heard us talk about susceptible versus resistant varieties and those intermediate varieties, that's the foundation. So we know we're checking our susceptible varieties first and then moving to resistant. Then we're looking at our paddock rotations, paddocks that have got closer rotations, higher risk, those with more stubble in them, higher risk. How is your hygiene? Harry talked about our infected seed, managing the green bridge. And then our last case is fungicides. And then when we are using fungicides, or our last point of control is fungicides, remember rotating our modes of action, using mixtures where available and staying within our label rates. So I'll finish up there.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Harry, Tara, and Josh. So we've had a few questions come through the chat. We've worked to answer some of them as we have gone. We also had some that have come through the registration process, some of which you've covered throughout your presentation, but there's actually there's a couple here which I might just get some points of clarification on. The first one is, so I'll open it up for Josh, Harry, Tara. You can choose who takes it amongst yourself. And that was, what are some of the different things we should consider for management if the season continues to be wet versus goes dry?
Yeah, I can start. I think have in your mind which diseases you know are likely to continue to proliferate if the tap turns off, and which ones that's going to be a natural fungicide or a natural control strategy. That way you can kind of refine down and target, you know, what are your key things that you need to manage, and then you can design a strategy around that. If it stays wet and it's everything, then it comes back to sticking with the good AFRIN principles about disease management and hitting your fungicide timings. You know, it's much easier to protect against incoming infection than it is to control large levels of disease with a lot of spores. So, you know, hitting those timings as close as you can. Hopefully we don't have more sloppy paddocks that you can't drive on because it's too wet and a lack of spray days. But that would be my advice going forward, is have a plan and kind of have a bit of a tailor based on both scenarios, understanding a little bit of your pathogen biology.
Excellent. Thank you. Josh.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the biggest thing is have that plan in place, know where you're going to get it. So Tara's touched on the majority of the points, but that plan is the biggest thing. If you've got a plan, you know where you're going to get your fungicide, you know what you're going to do if it turns wet or if it turns dry. Writing it down and actually putting it into action. What have you got available to you as options now, and what have you already got? And if you haven't got them, where are you going to get them? And keep in mind, if things turn wet, everyone's going to want those exact same things at the exact same time. Are you going to be able to get them, or do you need to get them now in place for that to occur? So I think that plan is just that most important part.
Yeah, and then you can stagger things as you go. You know, you can have the plan for a 2 or 3 spray strategy, and if the tap turns off, then you drop those last sprays off accordingly.
Yeah.
Also follow weekly forecast of weather. Not really looking too much ahead into the dry spring, at least for now, but maybe having that on your tabs all the time. What is the weather doing next week or in 2 weeks' time at best, and monitor symptoms all the time. So whenever you have a chance to go into paddock and look for symptoms, blowing the canopy mainly, because that is where you'll have a lot of disease hiding. So yeah, that will help.
Yeah. The other thing to think about is diseases. So like diseases like botrytis, we need to protect and start protecting early. We know once botrytis gets into the crop, it's hard to pull up after that point. So diseases like that, you can't really go, oh, I'm just going to leave it and it gets 10, 20% disease severity and then I'll control it at the reproductive stage if we're going to get there. It's too late. If things turn wet, you are not going to pull botrytis up. Sclerotinia is probably very similar. So those people that say, I'll just hold off and let a little bit of disease get in, that's fine with some diseases, but it's really knowing your diseases. Botrytis and chocolate spot, so chocolate spot in beans, botrytis in lentils and vetch, pulling it up later is not going to work. So really understand that disease and go back to that epidemiology.
Beautiful, thank you. A few questions have come in just on this discussion. The first one was, could you please clarify the best timings for thunder lentil fungicide timings?
You want to go, Josh?
Yep. So I'd say, from my perspective, if you're seeing early ascochyta blight in seedlings, we would have in the past said don't bother spraying, it's not going to make much difference, but we're seeing those early ascochyta infections causing seedling death. So you're basically essentially reducing your plants per square metre and your plant density. So we need to protect against that. So if you're seeing that early disease, which will be high risk paddocks usually, so where you've planted thunder on thunder or right next door and seeing that early disease, we're going to have to go in at that 4 to 8 node stage, or when you see that disease and pull it up early. Otherwise, you can probably hold off until your canopy closure. If you're not seeing ascochyta, then that's one that I would say, yep, you can probably hold off a little bit more on. But if your risk is there and you know you're in a high risk environment, you're probably thinking almost a bean strategy, or what we would have been promoting in beans 5 years ago that we wouldn't have promoted in lentils, is that early fungicide. And then obviously following up.
Josh, do you think the seed treatment will help?
Seed treatments have been shown to help carry over. We haven't done a huge amount on seed treatments. I think it'll give early control in some situations. We noticed in chickpeas, I did do some infected seed work in chickpeas. We got early disease control with the seed treatment, with P-Pickle T, or what it's Evershield now. I think it's going to help, but it's not going to be your out. If you're dealing with infected seed in chickpeas, we still noticed, I think there was 50% infected seed, and we saw a 30% reduction in plant establishment. So from that perspective, you're still going to have a reduction in plant establishment if you had seed carryover, or ascochyta carryover in your seed, sorry. So that's probably the important thing about testing your seed, like Harry talked about.
Okay, thank you. I've had one come through about powdery mildew. And the question is, we're noticing a lot of powdery mildew in barley, particularly over the last 2 weeks. What's your thoughts on management, and how much of a risk on yield will it be over the coming weeks or months?
Thanks, Belle. Yeah, look, that one is a slightly tough one in the sense that there's not been a lot of high pressure barley powdery mildew in South Australia, or from my knowledge too much in Victoria either, for a long time. And so we don't have a lot of recent experience about, you know, how far that infection goes and what the yield losses and things can be. But in saying that, we've been watching the inoculum levels slowly creep up in the last few seasons. And so we do know that there's more of it around, and we are quite kind of alert and aware about where that might be going. We know in a lot of the other states there's difficulty with chemical control because there's quite a lot of fungicide resistances, particularly in the DMIs, towards barley powdery mildew. We don't think that that is the case so much here, but in saying that, we can only test the samples that we receive, and when there's no infection, you know, we can't send a sample that doesn't exist. In saying all of that, powdery mildew is one of those ones that it doesn't need it to continue to rain. It's more about whether or not the humidity in the canopy persists. And in terms of yield losses, really, you can get some yield loss caused by damage early on and limiting the yield potential of the plant. And then again, towards the end of the season, if you've got humid enough conditions that the infection's able to jump up into the heads and cause damage to the head of the plant. So it's something that it's worth considering control for, and it is a bit of an unknown just in this region. I know Western Australia and the northern region have had a lot more of it in the last 10 years. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Tara. Another one that has come through, but this time we're going to rust. And the comment is, we're seeing rust in earlier sown wheat, mid to late tillering, no flute. Any thoughts on a strategy around this management?
Yeah, I'm guessing that this is referring to leaf rust. And we talked a little bit about this in the presentation, about which ones are going to proliferate in the next couple of months. And then it's about what their ability to take off is once we start warming up. And that's all dependent on moisture. So it is a bit of a crystal ball scenario, but certainly I think looking at some of those key fungicide timings for cereals like GS31 and then GS39 to help kind of protect those leaves as they come out and limit infection. In terms of the levels of rust that are moving around the system, like the air at the moment, I would say they're still at a relatively low level, and they're not going to build to really high levels, touch wood, for leaf rust over winter. So there is a bit of time in terms of that disease pressure through the winter to let your crops get up to kind of GS31 and then make an assessment based on the conditions and the forecast at that point. Harry, do you want to add to that?
I'll probably add on stripe rust. I just want to remind people about 2022 season, which we had a significant amount of rust, especially stripe rust. And that season, we didn't really have flutrifol at the start of the season, but I do know since that season, many people have started using flutrifol. So if we had that flutrifol, irrespective of the rust, maybe it is leaf or stripe rust, you probably would see some control early in the season. And what we have seen even in that 2022 season, when we had heavy rust infections, we did apply growth stage 31 and growth stage 39 fungicides, which had significant control. And people did ask questions about whether we should apply head washes later. If you have missed either of those two sprays, we have recommended to have a head wash spray, which probably would be really good to control that late season rust. But one thing to note is there are a number of pathotypes at the moment which actually can infect most of the varieties that we grow, which are highly susceptible. So keep a tab on whether rust is detected in your district, for instance. And from the detection date in your district, it is 10 days time you have to start thinking about control, because it takes 10 days to be in your paddock. That's it. So once it is there in your paddock, then for symptom expression, it only takes 7 days. So you probably have 2 weeks time to start thinking about control there. And the other thing that we found in 22 season was a significant amount of head infections as well because of the rust. So the rust actually went into the head, into the grain, and we have seen early premature death of the grain and also a lot of saprophytic takeover after that. So make sure that you have the 31 spray and 39 spray, aiming to control not just rust. Tara spoke about a lot on septoria as well, which means you're getting dual control on both septoria and rust with those two sprays, because most of the varieties are susceptible for both the diseases. So then you have a good control at the flowering stage, and then we'll just see what the season makes afterward.
The other thing I'd just like to add is some caveats to some of that. So Tara talked about the season, and it should remain cool. Remember, if the temperatures don't remain cool and we're expecting potentially warmer than average, if it does go into that optimal range, then that's a different story than what Tara was talking about. So just to put that caveat on there. And probably the other caveat I've got there is the susceptibility of the varieties. So we haven't mentioned the susceptibility of the varieties. If you're growing a susceptible variety, really got to be hot on it compared to those MRMS varieties in this. So we're talking about some cases, but remember susceptibility as well.
So on the
Beautiful.
Also on the powdery mildew, if the season turns out to be dry, and if the temperatures go beyond 20 to 25 degrees centigrade, you shouldn't be worried about getting powdery mildew at risk later in the season. So that should be good. But we don't want to expect that it's a dry season or dry finish.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I've just noticed we're at 12:02. So we've had some great questions come through to the chat. Thank you sincerely, everyone, for joining us today. Any quick final messages from our speakers, Tara, Hari, and Josh, particularly around any tips we need to remember with regards to fungicide resistance as we move through the season? Just some friendly reminders, and then we will wrap up. Tara.
Certainly fungicide resistance 5, which we have spoken about. Tailor your strategies based on the variety resistance. And also importantly, conditions is going to be a big role to play. And always remember that the choice of fungicide should be different to different sprays. Make sure that you are rotating those mode of actives and also avoiding those fungicide resistance buildup. There's a lot of pathogens especially in cereals, which has fungicide resistance. But in pulses, we do have so far not a significant fungicide resistance detected. So that doesn't mean that we just have to go and apply every fungicide that is available. So make sure you still have options there, and tailor those options so that you don't develop any new resistance at the moment. And also at the end of the season, make sure you know the withholding periods of every fungicide that you use, because there are a lot of MRL issues in few of those pulse crops, especially if you're planning to export the seed. So have everything on your plan, and good luck with the season.
Perfect. Thank you. Any final tips, Josh or Tara?
I'll just add in, just go back to that plan, have that plan, being able to write down in the office and actually think about it and put that fungicide resistance 5 together in your plan, doing it all together and writing it down makes it so much easier. And just remember the support there. Reach out to us. If you see something different, you see something that's not working, reach out to any of us, because that's how we can then engage with the rest of the industry, test it for you, and update everyone else. We can't see absolutely everything that's happening. We rely on our networks. So thank you.
Perfect. And just a reminder, the GRDC Disease Management Extension Network, we are here to deliver content to support any of your areas of interest. We do have workshops coming up in Kimber on the 28th of July, one in Maitland on the 1st of September, and Mildura on the 3rd of September. We can be agile with our webinars and podcasts. So if there's any topics you would like further information on, please feel free to reach out to us, and we are more than happy to organise something to get that information that you need. A friendly reminder is in our disclaimer about going forth from here. And also, I will remind you that we have a website with all of our resources and further reading and fact sheets on. And Bridget has put a link in the chat for our upcoming webinars as well. So thanks again to our speakers today, Josh, Tara, and Hari. That is excellent. Michaela, you've got one more question. If people need to leave, we understand you have things on, but we do have one question which has come, but I will just wrap it up there. And if you would like to stay for the final question, you can. If not, thanks sincerely for joining us. Wishing you all the very best for the remainder of the season.